She was conscious. He called 911. During this time, he asked the defendant, "What did you do?" She responded to him, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." During the 911 call, Fitzpatrick can be heard asking the defendant, "Where are the kids?" He later told police that she replied, "In the basement." Each child still had the exercise band that was used to strangle them tied around their necks when their father found them.
Today, we're going to talk about the new information revealed in Lindsay Clancy's arraignment hearing. I discussed this case more in depth with the initial news that came out, and I discussed the mental health struggles that many mothers and women in general go through, as well as my own personal experience, which, if you haven't seen that video yet, it's pretty detailed. I highly recommend it. I will link it in the description below. Prior to the horrific events that unfolded that evening, Lindsay had admitted herself into a mental health facility on New Year's Day of this year after she had thoughts of harming the children and harming herself. Also, in another new update, the prosecution has apparently found a very concerning note that was left behind on her phone prior to the murders. This note details one of the times in which she was suffering from these horrible thoughts about her children, and we will go into the specifics of that note in a bit here. There have been a lot of new updates in this case, and it's a lot to talk about because the public's opinion has really swayed quite a bit since this arraignment, while some who initially were very much in Lindsay's corner advocating for her due to her mental health struggles that were said to have been taking place at the time. After the arraignment, a lot of that opinion shifted to think that this was in fact planned and premeditated and calculated, that she wanted her own children dead. Some are still on the fence though and believe there is more to this story. So we are going to go through everything we know, not only with the case, but the arraignment, the newest updates, and talk through all of it. Hey guys, I'm Andrea Yates. This is 10 to Life. Let's dive right in. If you haven't heard of this case, the unbelievable tragedy of the Clancy family in Duxbury, Massachusetts has absolutely rocked the country and the world. The tragedy occurred on January 24th of this year, and it started as just a very average Tuesday for the Clancy family. Lindsay is a 32-year-old mother of 3. She has daughter Cora, who is 5 years old, Dawson, 3 years old, and Callan, 8 months old. Lindsay and her husband Patrick were home with the kids when Patrick left to go and pick up food for the family. Later on Tuesday night, and over the days that followed, news broke and spread like wildfire after it was reported that officers were called to the Clancy home just after 6 p.m., and they were met with a truly horrific scene. Upon their arrival, the officers discovered 3 children who were unconscious with obvious signs of trauma. The 3 children were rushed to a local hospital where Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead. The baby Callan managed to survive and was flown to Boston Children's Hospital where he was in critical condition but getting treatment. Lindsay was found on the ground outside of the house after jumping out of a window on the 2nd floor of her house. It was believed that she jumped in an attempt to end her own life after killing her children while nobody was home. Soon after, Lindsay was charged for murdering her 2 children and for severely injuring her 8-month-old Callan. Specifically, she was charged with 2 counts of homicide, 3 counts of strangulation or suffocation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. In my initial video, there were rumblings of what this weapon was, which we now have learned through the arraignment, and we will discuss. In another devastating blow, baby Callan didn't make it and passed away after just a few days of hospitalization. Now, Lindsay hasn't been charged with a 3rd count of murder as of yet, but she likely will be. While Lindsay was in the hospital, nobody knew details of her condition other than the fact that she was critically injured and recovering. As this case continued to garner an unbelievable amount of national media attention, the public struggled with how to make sense of what happened. Lindsay was a loving mother, a wife, a labor and delivery nurse. She and Patrick were living what many people would consider a perfect dream life in an affluent suburb with 3 precious babies. Many people wondered how a mother could do this in general, but the fact that Lindsay was a labor and delivery nurse added an entire separate layer of confusion. She literally helped bring children into the world, and her social media was filled with pictures of her and Patrick with the kids, kissing them, holding them, playing with them. She had a loving husband and a strong marriage, so how on earth did this happen? It didn't make any sense. People who knew Lindsay spoke out and said that she was struggling with postpartum depression, and also that she was on leave from her job at Massachusetts General Hospital. It was revealed that Lindsay was in an inpatient treatment program for mental health struggles for 5 days back in January, just a few weeks before this tragic night. After Lindsay took leave from work, Patrick also began to work from home instead of going into the office because he wanted to support Lindsay and be there for her and the kids. From the few friends that have spoken out on Lindsay's behalf, they all generally said the same thing. This isn't Lindsay. Lindsay loves her children. Lindsay would never do this. Lindsay loved being a mom. Neighbors, friends, anyone who knew Lindsay were absolutely stunned after hearing the news. Lindsay was doing what she could to take care of her mental health. Patrick knew about it. She was going to an outpatient program 5 days a week for her mental health issues, and it seemed like Lindsay and Patrick were doing everything right, essentially, to address Lindsay's mental health issues. So again, how on earth did this happen? Initially, it was widely believed that Lindsay may have experienced postpartum psychosis, which is a very serious mental illness that can affect women after giving birth. The symptoms can appear suddenly and feel like you lose your sense of reality, including hallucinations, delusions, mood swings, mood disorders, and many other behavioral changes. Facebook groups and other forums on social media had hundreds of women sharing their own experiences with postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, and a lot of people felt like once Lindsay woke up in the hospital, the reality of her actions would be so unbelievably unbearable that maybe criminal charges weren't the answer after all. It's no secret that for a very long time, mental illness in the US and really the world either wasn't known to many people or was just not spoken about because of societal norms and a widely held belief that talking about mental health struggles was bad or it was something to be ashamed of. But now in 2023, the conversation has completely shifted, especially over the past several years. Sure, there are some people who will always feel the way they do about mental illness, either being an excuse for someone's actions or a way to justify personal failures. But on the other hand, the numbers don't lie. Statistics across the population paint a completely different picture and illustrate that not only is mental illness more common than you would think, but it actually occurs in 1 out of 5 adults. That is 20% of the country. And I also want to point out that that statistic is only based on reported experiences of mental illness. So the true number could be much higher. And in light of that, some criminal courts have recognized this culture change of opinion, and more juries have believed people about mental health struggles because they've either experienced it firsthand or know somebody closely to them who has. Because of the way we've been moving in how we discuss mental illness in a non-judgmental and relatable way, many people across the country, including doctors, psychologists, and mental health experts, looked at Lindsay Clancy's situation in a completely different light than, say, they would have 20 years ago. 4 days before Lindsay was scheduled for her arraignment hearing via Zoom, her defense attorney, Kevin Reddington, had 2 interviews, one with the Boston Globe and one with the Boston Herald. Kevin Reddington is a high-profile criminal defense attorney and is regarded as a renowned professional in the legal field. In the interviews, he described Lindsay's mental state as zombie-like and the result of absolutely over-medication, possibly with a component of postpartum depression. He said that from October to January, Lindsay was prescribed as many as 12 different medications for postpartum anxiety, and that she can't be held criminally responsible. These medications included things like Ambien, Valium, Klonopin, Prozac, Elamicol, Ativan, Ramarion, Seroquel, Zoloft, and Trazodone, which I don't even think I said all of those right, but that just shows you how many medications she was on. He said, "This family was on the road to hell and unfortunately is not coming back. Her husband actually went to the doctor the week before this happened to ask for help and said, 'You are turning her into a zombie.' It was just a brutal, brutal existence that they were living. Her parents were aware of this and they were trying to help the husband as well. Her husband was never told that he shouldn't leave her alone, and I'd like to think in this case it's justice for Lindsay as well. I don't think anyone needs to be lectured about the horrific loss of 3 beautiful babies. Mr. Reddington also filed a motion that the judge granted, and it scheduled Lindsay to speak with a forensic psychologist to evaluate her before the arraignment. Now let's talk about the medications that she was prescribed. In what Mr. Reddington described as a staggering cocktail, her medications included a mixture of antidepressants, benzos, antipsychotic meds, and anti-seizure medications. Now, the reality is that a lot of people are prescribed these same medications for a plethora of reasons. Maybe not all of them at once, but these work for a lot of different people. Everybody is different, and our bodies all react differently. What may work for you may give another person horrific side effects. So it isn't to say that these are all bad, horrible, terrible medications, which you guys get what I mean. It's just all of our biologies, personal, individual biologies, react a different way. But what Lindsay's attorney was trying to say is that all of them combined created a medically induced psychosis, and that's what ultimately led to her killing her children that horrific night. At the time, there were still questions on everyone's mind about how exactly the events all unfolded, and that all remained unclear. So with this new information coming out, many people following this case closely were a little taken aback because it was like, hold on, wait a second. We assumed that she was suffering from postpartum depression and had a moment of postpartum psychosis, similar to Andrea Yates. And that didn't exactly match what her attorney was describing. In fact, he didn't mention anything about postpartum psychosis at all in his initial interviews. Why didn't he say anything about postpartum psychosis? Surely this attorney realized that there was an overwhelming amount of support from the public, from people who believed that she experienced a moment of psychosis, right? Why not use that for her defense? Maybe medically intoxicated psychosis was a better legal strategy? Or maybe that's exactly what her attorney meant in the first place, and that he was including postpartum psychosis. Nobody really knew. On Tuesday, February 7th, Lindsay was arraigned, and at this hearing, the chilling and horrific details were revealed of what exactly happened that day. Lindsay appeared via Zoom in a hospital bed with a mask on, and honestly, you really can't tell her emotions, but to me, she does seem to be heavily medicated.
On Friday, January 27th, 2023, using an erasable whiteboard because she was still temporarily intubated, one of the first questions that Lindsay Clancy asked was, do I need an attorney? She knew that she had murdered her children, and she had the clarity, focus, and mental acumen to focus on protecting her own rights and interests. The following is a summary of the events that led to the murders of Cora Clancy, Dawson Clancy, and Callan Clancy. On the morning of Tuesday, January 24th, 2023, the defendant took her 5-year-old daughter Cora to the pediatrician's for an appointment. She interacted with a receptionist, nursing staff, and a doctor. There were apparently no issues with the defendant's demeanor or behavior as she completed the appointment and was allowed to leave with Cora without any issues or concerns. When she returned home, she went outside with Cora and her 3-year-old son Dawson to play in the snow. They built a snowman. The defendant sent photos to her mother and to the defendant, straight that to her husband. She texted with them. Nothing in the text was out of the ordinary or any sign of any distress or trouble. Back inside later that day at 4:02 p.m., the defendant searched on her phone Kids Miralax. She then searched that Takeout 3V via her cell phone at 4:13 p.m. Immediately after doing that, she used Apple Maps on her phone to determine how long it would take someone to drive from her home in Duxbury to 3V restaurant in Plymouth. So she would know how long someone would be gone if they ran that errand. She next went on the CVS website at 4:47 p.m. and then called CVS on Summer Street in Kingston. She spoke to the manager of CVS and asked if they had the Kids Miralax. The manager told her no, but they had other similar medications. According to the manager of CVS, her voice did not sound slurred or impaired in any way. She had no trouble understanding the defendant, and it was a perfectly normal conversation. At 4:53 p.m., the defendant texted her husband, who was working in his home office in their basement. She texted, any chance you want to do takeout from 3V? I didn't cook anything. It's been a long day. This was an unusual request, as when the family ordered takeout, they usually go somewhere closer to home, but it was a place that they had been in the past. Patrick Clancy texted back yes, and then the defendant asked him to check the menu. At 5:06 p.m., the husband texted the defendant asking what she was going to get. She responded, a Mediterranean power bowl. She spelled it correctly, and it was something that was on the menu. He then told her that he wanted the scallop and pork belly risotto. At 5:10 p.m., the defendant called 3V Restaurant to place the order. She got the order correct. She gave the correct name for pickup, Patrick. The hostess who took the call said there was nothing out of the ordinary about this call. She was able to understand the defendant, that her voice was not slurred or impaired in any way. At 5:15 p.m., Patrick Clancy headed out the door to run these errands at the defendant's request. As he left, she texted him Pedialyte liquid stool softener. Surveillance footage shows Mr. Clancy at CVS on Summer Street in Kingston at 5:32 p.m. He goes to the medication aisle, the children's medication aisle. Phone records show that he called the defendant at 5:33 p.m. and she did not answer the phone. She then calls him back at 5:34 p.m. and the call lasted 14 seconds. He's there at the store unsure of which medication to get, and she tells him exactly what she wants. He had no issues communicating with her. It was a completely normal call, although he did mention that she seemed like she was in the middle of something. He is on surveillance footage during this time, exiting that aisle and appeared to be using his phone. He then heads to the register, makes his purchase, and leaves the store at 5:37 p.m. He's next seen on footage at 3V Restaurant at 5:54 p.m. He picks up the food and he's out of there within a minute. When he arrives home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. He did not see or hear the defendant or the children. He actually called her cell phone at 6:09 p.m. looking for them, and she did not answer. He went to their bedroom on the second floor and the door was locked. He was able to open it, and when he looked inside, he saw blood on the floor in front of a full-length mirror and the window open. He immediately runs downstairs and into the backyard, where he finds the defendant laying on the ground. She appeared to have cuts on her wrists and neck, but he stated to 911 that those wounds were no longer bleeding. She was conscious. He called 911. During this time, he asked the defendant, "What did you do?" She responded to him, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." During the 911 call, Patrick can be heard asking the defendant, "Where are the kids?" He later told police that she replied, "In the basement." So immediately after this happened, she knew what she had done and she knew where the kids were. When EMS arrived, he asked them to stay with her so he could go find his kids. The 911 call kept going. Patrick can be heard on the 911 call entering the home and heading to the basement. At one point, he calls out, "Guys." He can then be heard screaming in agony and shock as he found his children. His screams seem to get louder and more agonized as the time passes. Cora and Callan were on the floor in the den area of the finished basement, which is to the left when you walk down the stairs, while Dawson was alone on the floor in his father's home office, which is to the right when you go down the stairs. Each child still had the exercise band that was used to strangle them tied around their necks when their father found them. Dawson and Callan were face down on the floor. Cora was on her side with her torso turned towards the floor. He removed the bands and begged them to breathe. He continued to scream uncontrollably and screamed for officers to come to the basement. The dispatchers are hearing this and they send help down to the basement, and when they encounter Patrick, he yells out, "She killed the kids." The police rushed the children to ambulances that brought them to the hospital, and unfortunately, Cora and Dawson were declared dead at the hospital. Callan was med-flighted to Boston Children's Hospital. Medical staff was able to restart his pulse, but not his brain activity. He was placed on life support for several days before passing away. The defendant was transported to South Shore Hospital and then to a Boston area hospital where she remains. She sustained several broken bones in her back and her rib cage. The police were able to find several notebooks in the defendant's home pursuant to a search warrant, and also notes on her phone that were similar to journal entries. In the months, weeks, and days preceding January 24th, 2023, the defendant meticulously detailed her daily activities, her children's lives, her mental state, and her medication use. Her writing was clear, precise, and articulate. She never indicated that she was hallucinating, delusional, or had disordered thoughts or speech. In all of her writing, she appears to know who she is, where she is, the date, and with whom she's interacted. She wrote a note on her phone the day before killing the children, stating that she had, quote, "a touch of postpartum anxiety," end quote, around returning to work. She wrote that her psychiatrist had prescribed medication to help her. The defendant was initially diagnosed, according to her husband, with generalized anxiety disorder. She was then evaluated at the Women and Infant Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Providence, Rhode Island on December 20th, 2022. There, after an evaluation, she was told in the presence of her husband by psychiatrists that she did not have postpartum depression and that she had no symptoms of postpartum depression. She wrote in her journal that at times she had suicidal ideation in December of 2022, and she also told her husband that she had suicidal thoughts and on one occasion had thoughts of harming her children. But she did not write or voice those thoughts after a stay at McLean Hospital. When she had those thoughts, she consulted with a psychiatrist and with her husband, and then she committed herself to McLean Hospital on January 1st, 2023. She was discharged by the hospital on January 5th, 2023, and the hospital did not file any paperwork at that time attempting to have her committed as a danger to herself or others. She also kept meticulous and detailed daily medication logs in a diary that she wrote. She detailed that she had difficulties with each of the medications that were prescribed to her. And when she had issues with those medications, she detailed how her doctor had her stop that medication or wean off of it and then try something else. They were trying different medications to see what would work for her, what would benefit her. According to her husband, she was never on more than 4 to 5 medications at one time. And at the time of the murder, she was taking only 3 medications. And he said to the police that she always took the medications as prescribed. After her stay at McLean, the defendant appeared to be getting better, according to her husband. She slept well, interacted with friends and family. She went out with her kids and husband to places like the Kingsbury Club in Duxbury, the Charlie Horse Restaurant, the Museum of Science in Boston, the Cape Codder down the Cape, interacting with her family and the public without any apparent difficulties. She even stayed alone with the children on several occasions without any issues in January of 2023. Her husband asked her in mid-January, "Are you still having suicidal thoughts?" And she said no. The defendant's parents visited the family the weekend of January 21st, 2023. They interacted with the defendant in person. The defendant was able to run errands while her mom watched the children. She texted back and forth with her mother, and there was nothing out of the ordinary about these text messages. In fact, the defendant texted her mother on January 22nd, 2023 to ask how her ride home went. During this conversation, the defendant's mother wrote, quote, "Enjoyed seeing everyone this weekend. Nice to see you doing better," end quote. On the night of the killings, Patrick Clancy was interviewed by the police at Beth Israel Deaconess Plymouth Hospital. He told the police that the defendant was having one of her best days. She was smiling and happy, and there was no indication that she was going to harm the kids. No one at all described her as acting like a zombie in the days leading up to the murder or on the day of the murders themselves. On February 5th, 2023, this past Sunday at 1:35 p.m., while sitting with Dr. Paul Zeisel, the psychologist hired by defense counsel to evaluate her mental state, the defendant used Dr. Zeisel's cell phone to call her husband. She left a voicemail stating that she loved him. Yesterday, on February 6, 2023, at 10:09 a.m., she again used Dr. Zeisel's cell phone to call her husband. This time he answered, and during this call, the defendant stated that after he left the house that night, she killed the kids because she heard a voice and had, quote, "a moment of psychosis," end quote. He asked her what voices she heard, and she said she heard a man's voice telling her to kill the kids and kill herself because it was her last chance. Patrick Clancy told the police the defendant had never heard voices before. He also told the police the defendant had never used the word psychosis to him before. The first time she used that word psychosis was when she was with the doctor hired by defense counsel and using his cell phone. The defendant actually wrote a note on her phone on October 25th, approximately 3 months before this happened, October 25th, 2022. She wrote, quote, "I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like my first baby. And I know that's not fair to them. I know that. I was feeling so depressed last evening when Cora and Dawson came home from school. I know it runs off on them, so we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection with all of my kids." She then wrote that she wants to have more kids eventually. The children were killed by ligature strangulation. Ligature strangulation causes the victim to become unconscious anywhere from 10 seconds up to a minute. The more the victim struggles, the longer it takes. After the victim is unconscious, the ligature must be held in place with force, squeezing the neck for up to an additional 4 to 5 minutes to cause death. Therefore, she had to strangle each of them to unconsciousness and then make sure the bands were squeezing their little necks for several minutes. She could have changed her mind at any point during that time and removed those bands from their necks, and she did not. The defendant did not take advantage of the situation when her husband left the home that night. She created the situation, and she used Apple Maps to make sure she would have enough time to strangle each child before her husband returned from where she had sent him. The defendant is a danger to herself and others. She planned these murders, gave herself the time and privacy needed to commit the murders, and then she strangled each child in the place where they should have felt the safest, at home with their mom. She did so with deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty.
The prosecution's summary of what happened that night led to an extreme change in public opinion across social media, because hearing what actually happened didn't match what many had assumed happened, like a snap out of reality moment of psychosis. And it was a lot to take in. And I will say, when I first heard all of this information during the arraignment, my jaw kind of hit the floor. I had assumed that Lindsay had certainly experienced postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, but as these details were coming out, I started to wonder, was this premeditated? And we're going to go over some of those details in a minute, because the struggle here is, although there are certain key things and key actions that Lindsay took, it's very subjective. It can either be interpreted, depending on the person, as premeditation, and this was her plan and she was calculating this to make sure she could get away with it, or it could be taken a completely different way, as though she is seriously sick, or that she was looking into things in a way to protect herself. And let me just give you an example here of some of these like main ones that everybody's talking about. One of the first things that was very troubling for people to hear is that the prosecution said she was never diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Now, I just want to say that to me is not necessarily indicative of the fact that maybe she was or was not struggling with postpartum psychosis. Just because she wasn't diagnosed with it, I don't believe means that she was not suffering from it. And not only for the reason that many people are suffering from illnesses all of the time without having an official formal diagnosis, but especially when you are going through something like postpartum depression or psychosis. And I'm speaking firsthand. I'm speaking about my personal experience here because I have knowledge on this. I suffered from this. When you are in it, you don't know that you are in it. You recognize that something is wrong. You know that you're not feeling right, just like Lindsay did. She was reaching out to her doctors, to Facebook groups, to mom groups saying, these medications aren't working. I'm feeling this way. Somebody help me. You know something's wrong, but you don't know what it is. And it's hard to explain, but it's almost like you don't know how to not diagnose yourself, but it's almost like you're in denial that you're suffering from this. And that's unfortunately because there is such a stigma attached to it as well, that you almost don't want to acknowledge that you might be suffering from it. And I remember with my own personal experience, and I'll move on in just a second here, but with my own personal experience, I remember I suffered for weeks and weeks and weeks with postpartum depression, and I didn't know what it was. And literally the moment I had a break and called my doctor, I was diagnosed within seconds over the phone. He didn't even need to see me. He knew just based on what I was telling him and what I was saying. He's like, no, I'm calling you in a prescription right now. But what I'm saying is that when you're in it, sometimes people don't know that they're in it, and it doesn't mean that you have to have a formal diagnosis just to mean you're suffering from it. So when the prosecution said that she was never diagnosed with it, a lot of people came out saying, well, before the arraignment, it was said that she was struggling from postpartum psychosis. Come to find out, she was never even diagnosed with it. I don't think that necessarily is black and white, but again, it's subjective. But let me go into these instances where I told you, you could either be on one side of the line with it or the other, because again, it is very subjective. They call out in the arraignment about how Lindsay used GPS to map out how long Patrick would be gone, choosing a restaurant that was far away to possibly give her more time to orchestrate and execute her master plan. Many people said, by her finding a restaurant far away and by her researching the GPS, it's because she wanted to double check she would have enough time. She wanted to make sure that she had a window of time, and she knew, I only have 20 minutes to get this done. I got to do it. She wanted to check all of the boxes. But some people on the other side are suggesting, no, she was checking the GPS and checking the restaurant because even though that's the restaurant they chose, she was worried. She needed her husband there as a crutch and didn't want him to be gone very long. So she was checking, okay, it's only 20 minutes away. He'll be back in 20 minutes. I'll be okay. And that's why she was checking GPS. What the real reason was? Unclear. It's gray. Also, another big piece of information, her calling CVS, making an extra stop, knowing that the medication she needed for her child wasn't in stock there. I believe it was the Miralax. Many people are suggesting that she purposefully called that store to make sure that they were out of stock so that there would have to be another stop along the way and prolong him returning home and giving her more time. While some are saying, no, she went to the pediatrician that morning with her children. She was calling to check inventory levels because she was checking where the medication was because her kids needed it. I don't know. What do you think? Also, what do you think about the journal entry that was written in October saying that she had feelings of resentment towards Cora and Dawson, her two older kids, because of her little boy Callan, the 8-month-old at the time of the death? Many suggest that this illustrated that she was beginning to plot and plan and that she wanted to get rid of her children. She was done being a mother. She was journaling how she hated them and had resentment feelings and all of these things. While some, especially those who have suffered from postpartum depression, possibly even psychosis, I don't know, are saying no, all of the hormones were still out of whack from giving birth to Callan. She was feeling the feelings of resentment towards Cora and Dawson because she wasn't able to give Callan her full attention and bond with Callan the way she was her older kids, because there was kind of like, there's a hormonal imbalance with that, and that there is oftentimes resentment towards the other kids because you feel as though you're being torn. What she was truly feeling when she wrote that, only Lindsay knows. Now, should she have been left alone with the kids? Even though apparently nobody told Patrick that she shouldn't be left alone with the kids. Was that a big red flag? Also, many people are curious about her being conscious when Patrick was there and knowing that she killed them, rather than her waking up in the hospital room and not remembering anything or remembering the event at all itself happening. If she was in psychosis and in a psychosis state, would she remember what had happened, or would she not have any recollection? People are saying because she woke up and knew that she had killed them, that she had been fully coherent when she actually did take their lives. I think one of the absolute biggest things that has been a turning point for the public is what she said on the whiteboard. The very first thing about needing an attorney. The first thing when she woke up was apparently she asked, do I need an attorney? Which people said, if you were remorseful, if you were sorry for what you did, if you had any regret, you'd ask how your kids are, where are the kids? You wouldn't be asking for an attorney. Again, could it be in that moment? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here, guys, because I'm not saying that I'm still, siding with Lindsay. I'm not saying that I think it was premeditated, and we'll get to my opinions in a bit here. I'm just trying to be objective here so that you can see why everybody is so divided on this. So by her asking if she needs an attorney, could it simply be that she woke up, realized where she was, remembered what had happened, and the first thing she asked was, do I need an attorney before I speak to you? Do I need to protect myself? Many people say you always should lawyer up. So I don't know the answer here. One of the quotes about Lindsay from that day was that she was having her best day. So can significant boosts in mood or energy sometimes be a sign that someone now has the mental energy or motivation to go through with self-harm or harming others? And what do you think about the fact that Patrick said that Lindsay has never mentioned anything about psychosis ever to him, except for after speaking to the forensic psychologist before the arraignment? Because Patrick said that Lindsay told him she heard a man's voice telling her to do this. Do you believe her? If she had voices in the past with her background, is it weird to you that she never had mentioned it in the past? Do you think that that should have been brought to the attention, or is it in her medical records, and will we learn that when this goes to trial during discovery? Is it right now protected under HIPAA? Could she have expressed that? We don't know. But do you have any guesses about why she didn't tell Patrick about the voice when they spoke on the phone that evening? Because Patrick said it sounded like she was in the middle of something when he called her. So if she was at the house and she was executing this plan and she was hearing voices tell her that, and he calls, why wouldn't she have told Patrick, I'm hearing voices, somebody's telling me to hurt the kids, unless she truly was in a state of psychosis and believed that that voice was out to get her or out to get the children? Very possible. Personally, I've never suffered from a psychosis episode, so I'm not a professional. I can't speak on that in any regard. Also, the brutality of the murders. Resistance bands were used, which is the deadly weapon that was referred to in the charges. Now, this haunts me truly, because any type of strangulation or suffocation, you know that you have to be hands-on, looking them in the eye. Some believe that when you use your hands as a means of strangulation, it's much more personal, because you're skin to skin, you're looking at them in the eyes, and you are, sucking the life out of them, literally. While some believe that if you use an object, such as a resistance band, a rope, a garrote, am I saying that right? Like the John Bonet thing, a garrote, I think I'm saying that right, that it is less personal because you can either do it from behind and you don't have to have eye contact with them, or because it's an object so you can kind of look away rather than just using your hands. I don't think it makes it any less brutal. I personally don't. I think it's absolutely horrible and horrific. I think you would be, scratching at your throat. It's awful to think about. But this is also one of the details that has so many people in the public divided on if they have empathy for what Lindsay went through, and if they feel for her and support her, or if they think that she is a cold-blooded, calculated murderer. Now let's hear what the defense had to say. And I want to note here that in the arraignment, the defense shifted from just medication-induced psychosis to postpartum psychosis.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Your Honor, my request is that the court not enter what I would suggest is an inhumane order, ordering this woman to be incarcerated. We all know, as people that work in the system, that jails and prisons are woefully deficient in medical care of the most basic type. We all know that this is an individual, as Your Honor knows from Dr. Yates' letter, who is in dire medical condition. We all know that this woman is, as counsel concedes apparently, a danger to herself. I question whether she would ever make it to a trial. She's extremely emotional. However, she's unable, and has been unable, to express any happiness or sadness or cry. And in fact, sometime about a month or two ago, she made the comment, I just wish that I could feel something. Now, our society fails miserably in treating women with postpartum depression or even postpartum psychosis. It's medicate, medicate, medicate. Throw the pills at you and then see how it works. If it doesn't work, increase the dose or decrease the dose. Then end up trying another combination of medications. We're talking a relatively short period of time from when that baby was born in October up until January when this incident occurred, Your Honor, that she was on such significant dosage of medication. Your Honor knows that Cora was born in 2017. It was a very uneventful, normal pregnancy and delivery. No issues afterwards as far as anxiety. Dawson was born in 2018. Again, it was a normal birth. She had no significant issues as far as anxiety. She did have to have stitches and she was sore, and that was about it. Then, of course, Callan was born. When Callan was born, she ended up becoming depressed and suffered from significant anxiety, as a result of which she consulted with a number of doctors. A number of doctors indicated that she would be able to sleep, she would be able to feel, she would be able to emote once these medications kicked in. And again, as I say, our medical in our society completely abandons women with this condition. It's easy to say, come on, you have a healthy baby. You have a wonderful husband. You're able to take care of your kids in your home. You're lucky. Take the pills, you'll be okay. Well, they put her on a number of medications. They put her on Prozac, which Your Honor is well aware is what's known as SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Your Honor knows that along with some of these medications, they have the black box warning from the FDA, may cause homicidal ideation. She was on Ativan. She was on Benadryl. And then she ended up being told, okay, because she was complaining about the effects of the Prozac, they said, stop the Prozac, we'll find something else. They put her on Remeron. Then they added on Seroquel. And Your Honor, I attached from David Benjamin, the toxicologist, some papers with the submission, and Your Honor can see the side effects that this Seroquel causes. She was having bad thoughts. She was having worsening depression. Her husband suffered through that phase. Her parents were well aware of the fact that she was suffering from this depression and depressive phase. She wasn't sleeping. She ended up, at some point, Your Honor, December 31st, she was on Seroquel. They told her then the Valium would be stopped. She was a shell of herself, no personality, and went to the doctor again. The doctor again prescribes the Seroquel, and then they took her off the Seroquel. And then she went to the doctor, and at that point, they prescribed Trazodone, Ativan, amitriptyline, right up to the very end, when she was so bad that she voluntarily turned herself in, if you will, to the McLean Hospital. We know that that's a psychiatric hospital. She was at the McLean Hospital for a period of about 5 days. While at the McLean Hospital, they basically tried to get her off the Seroquel. She wanted to get off the benzodiazepines. She felt that she was being addicted to the benzodiazepines. She then ends up on Trazodone, Ativan. Her mood was terrible after she got out of McLean Hospital. She still had the suicidal thoughts. As the government has indicated, she even told her husband that she had suicidal thoughts. You think this is something that she's planning to kill these 3 kids by going and getting a menu, going on to Google Maps or whatever it is, and finding out the distance? When she tells her husband she's having thoughts, probably a month prior, thoughts of hurting the children, they go to the doctor again, and she's on the medications, on and off, on and off. This is a significant issue between the postpartum depression as well as possibility of postpartum psychosis that is pretty much ignored. But nevertheless, with the overlay of the SSRIs and the history, and Your Honor has some emails and things that people would reach out to me from all over the world, indicating that their daughter had the same problem, that they had the same problem. Your Honor is well aware that many times when people are on Prozac or on SSRIs, workplace violence, homicides, family homicides. This is clearly a tragic, which is a word that's used too much in the criminal justice system, but this really is a tragedy in this case. So we have, obviously, I would suggest, a very good defense for this young woman. She's 32 years of age, Your Honor. She met her husband. He was the love of her life. They got married. Wonderful young couple. And as counsel noted, she always wanted to have kids, always wanted to have babies. She's a nurse. She went to be a midwife because she wanted to help other women that would be in having babies, but didn't want to have all the medications. She was not a big medication person. Your Honor saw, I think there's probably close to 50 letters that have been submitted to you, and I know you read every one of them. The incredible outpouring of support by other nurses that work at Mass General Hospital. The fact that these women have a vigil, that they write the letters to this court imploring you to understand that you sentence, as far as bail issue, the woman before you, who was a beautiful person, who was thoroughly destroyed by these medications. That's for another day, obviously. A bail issue, bail argument. Your Honor is well aware under Cromwell versus Vasquez at 481 Mass 750. Supreme Judicial Court indicated that this court, or the court, has vested in sound discretion of the bail judge. And the main considerations would be obviously the usual bail considerations: nature and circumstance of the offense, likelihood of success on the defense, roots in the community, and of course, as in Vasquez case, as well as Como versus Herring, 489 Mass 569, defendant's risk of flight. So now you have a situation, Your Honor, where this woman has incredible support, as you saw, letters from Foxborough that was signed by about 15 women, letters from her family, friends, letters from people she's known since the 6th grade that have stayed in touch with her. One thing that's a theme that is readily apparent is that Lindsay loved her children, that she would always, one of the letters said, she would always rub her belly, rub her belly. She had pictures of her pregnant standing next to Patrick, hanging on the wall. I was in the house. The house is absolutely loaded with indicia of love for those kids. Photographs on the wall, little drawings, all sorts of games, toys, playpens, bassinets in the living room, in the dining room, the kitchen loaded with toys. Virtually the entire house, including their master bedroom. Toys, things for the kids. This is not a situation, Your Honor, that was planned by any means. This is a situation that clearly was a product of mental illness. Now, under the Vasquez case, one of the issues, as I said, is whether or not there's a risk of flight. Now, I did submit to Your Honor a letter that was written by her physician, her attending surgeon, Nakul Rekha. This doctor was in surgery until 8:30 at night and actually took the time to write this letter for you to review. And I just want to make note that he makes reference to the fact that she is now in her 12th day of hospitalization following admission on January 25 after a 20-foot fall. She suffered, unlike when the government Friday was saying that she can move her legs and she's getting better, she's okay. No, she's not okay at all. He indicates that she suffered several severe spine fractures, including spinal cord transection. You know what that means. At the level of T5, T6. As you know, she had surgery for this from the orthopedic spine surgical service who performed a decompression infusion. Unfortunately, she is not expected to recover meaningful function at this point below that level of the spinal cord, which makes her a paraplegic, unable to move her legs or feel sensation from below her, he refers to umbilicus or belly button. He says she has no function below this level. Additionally, less active issues include rib fractures in the chest, both sides, cervical spine fractures, necessitate the wearing of a collar around her neck due to the cervical spine fractures. She's paralyzed. The doctor indicates that she needs significant medical treatment. Doctor recommends that she would be discharged to Spalding Rehab. Now, you know that we have Spalding Rehab. You know that we have the Worcester Hospital. This court is vested under Vasquez with your authority to have this woman not held on bail. Perhaps put a GPS on her, I guess, if someone's concerned that she's going to miraculously recover, which isn't going to happen. As Your Honor knows, being a paraplegic, paralyzed, she can't move. Can't get off the bed. She can't walk. She can't even go to the bathroom. She has to have 24/7 medical care. Her emotional state is so bad that there is a significant fear of suicide. She has to have someone sit in the room 24/7 to watch her. They don't talk to her. They're not, chatting it up. They just sit there and watch out of that concern that she would. So you have a paraplegic who can't walk, who is definitely a danger to herself, and the government wants to put her in where? Framingham State Prison? Plymouth House of Correction? There's no way that any humane person would do that, especially within the structure of our criminal justice system, where a person is presumed innocent. And I'm not suggesting with the facts that the government has read, but she has a good defense. She's got a darn good defense for this case, because that's what happened. And I just want to share with you, Your Honor, one of the things that's interesting. When I was in the house, I came across a drawer that had a bunch of pill bottles in it, and I called the DA and I said, I got these pill bottles, and we made arrangements. I'm going to be giving them to them. And it's all the Prozac and the Trazodone and all that stuff. But inside the drawer was this little vase. And I didn't know what it was. It just looked like a little vase to me. And my wife said to me, oh, that looks like a wish vase. I said, what's a wish vase? She said, when people write down little wishes and they put little pieces of paper and they put them inside the vase. And there are literally dozens of these little pieces of paper that talk about Lindsay's wish for happiness and health for her children, that she could get pregnant again, that she would be able to be with her children, little Callan, Dawson, Cora, that they would be happy, healthy, and successful. This is not a woman, Your Honor, that had any reason to harm those innocent children. My request, Your Honor, is that the court would put her on a GPS if you feel that's required, and let the doctors continue to treat her. Let her go to Spalding Rehab. She will sign a waiver that allows probation at any time to speak with her treating physicians or social worker, find out how she's doing. Does it look as though she's getting close to regaining the ability to walk, which she isn't, but nevertheless, they would be able to do that. And then the government would be notified, and they can come back in here again and try to hold her without bail. And my request would then be to Worcester for the emotional and the mental illness aspect. I don't think that it's fair or just or consistent with our duties to each other as human beings to put her in jail. I'm asking that she be allowed to continue with her medical treatment.
It's important to note that both the prosecution and the defense wouldn't be doing their jobs very well if they weren't good at making us see both sides of things. But I want to know what you guys think after hearing that. Did this change your mind about Lindsay? Did your mind shift? What was your original opinion on this case, and what is your opinion now? Mothers and mental health professionals across the nation have expressed frustration on how postpartum mood disorders have been portrayed in this case, saying prosecutors and the defense are each missing the complexity and nuance of the mental health challenges. Some experts are even worried that the various characterizations of what Lindsay may have experienced could discourage women experiencing postpartum mood disorders from seeking care. Melissa Ann DuBois, an OBGYN nurse and mental health advocate, recently stated, "The rhetoric coming from the prosecution and other people in authority dangerously distort the medical complexity of this disorder. When they paint Lindsay as a monster who carried out an elaborate, premeditated murder instead of as someone suffering from a serious mental illness that wasn't properly treated and who subsequently had a psychotic break, it sends a message to all the struggling parents out there that nothing can help me." Lindsay's case is one of the more recent occurrences of filicide, where a parent kills their child or children. But it's not the first, and unfortunately, it will not be the last. Rates of filicide have remained fairly steady over the years, with about 500 per year in the United States alone, and this is according to a 2014 study. Researchers found that men and women were equally likely to kill children younger than 1 year old, but that fathers were more likely to be the alleged murderer of a child older than 1. So why exactly does something like this happen? According to one forensic psychiatrist, there are 5 known reasons that parents are driven to kill their children. Those reasons include killing a child after neglecting them, to get revenge on the other parent, an unwanted child or pregnancy, believing that killing them is truly what is best for them, or the parent is experiencing psychosis or a mental health illness, which is what Lindsay Clancy's defense is arguing. When forensic psychiatrists try to determine whether a crime was premeditated, they look at the whole picture instead of just one incident. In this case, that would include Lindsay's past history with her children. According to almost everyone who knew Lindsay personally or even on the surface, she was by all accounts a great mother that loved her children deeply and absolutely loved being a mother. Even her husband Patrick spoke out asking the public to forgive Lindsay since he had already forgiven her. He wrote that absolutely heart-wrenching post on the GoFundMe detailing their family traditions, talking about Cora, Dawson, Callan, and spoke in depth about his marriage to Lindsay. He said nothing matched her intense love for their kids and her dedication to being a mother, that it was all she ever wanted, and that her passion taught him how to be a better father. The note that the prosecution found on Lindsay's phone was prior to this horrific event unfolding. However, it's not specified if this entry was made prior to her admitting herself into inpatient facility on New Year's Day, or if this note was made in the weeks leading up to the murders. However, this note said, "I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like my first baby, and I know that's not fair to them. I know that. I was feeling so depressed last evening when Cora and Dawson came home from school. I know it runs off of them, so we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection with all of my kids." Now, we know that she had entered into that psychiatric hospital on New Year's Day of this year, and she was discharged on January 5th, just a few weeks before these horrific murders occurred. Many psychiatrists and psychologists say that one reason someone could be struggling this badly with a postpartum mood disorder, or really even mental illness in general, and that they never mention anything to anyone about it, is because of the fear that their children will be taken away from them. However, this wasn't the case with Lindsay, which is what makes this so troubling. She told Patrick. She was also on leave from work. She sought out treatment programs. She was on prescribed medication. She was doing all of the things that she thought were necessary. So why didn't medication work on Lindsay? What are women supposed to do that seek medical treatment, but the medications aren't working? What then? Why wasn't Lindsay diagnosed with postpartum psychosis prior to this? I don't have the answers, and there are still so many questions, but it's important to ask these questions to further the conversation and to destigmatize mental health issues that women face after childbirth. And something I also just want to mention, guys, if she had these plans to annihilate her entire family, or her children, not her entire family, but her children, starting back in October when she was journaling, why would she go through the steps of trying to get medication? Why would she go through the steps of trying to get an inpatient treatment, do the 5-day-a-week outpatient treatment, tell her husband she needed him to work from home, take leave from work, if she wasn't trying to better herself and better her mental stage and her emotions? Then why would she do all of those things? If she was just a cold, calculated murderer who no longer wanted to be a mom and just wanted to check out, why would she take all of those steps? It doesn't really add up to me. And I could be wrong. There could be something I'm missing entirely, so let me know in the comments. But that doesn't add up to me. I would think, based on cases we've seen, studies that have been out there, if somebody wants to just check out as a parent and not have the responsibility of children anymore, who just wants to be rid of all of that, not necessarily Chris Watts. I know that's an easy default to go to, but I believe his motivation was more lust and driven by his, mistress. But if somebody just doesn't want to be a parent anymore, I don't believe that they're going to try to seek out treatment to get better. I don't see how that ties together. Now, one of the most infamous cases of filicide is Andrea Yates. We all know that for the most part. If you're my age, you know that. If you're younger and watching this, maybe you don't. But she's the mother who drowned her 5 children in Houston while battling postpartum psychosis, schizophrenia, and postpartum depression. Andrea was initially convicted of the murders and sentenced to life behind bars. But in 2006, the conviction was overturned and she received a new trial where she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. In Texas, defendants who use insanity as a defense must prove that they were not only mentally ill, but that they did not know that their actions were wrong at the time of the alleged crime. She's now in a psychiatric care facility, and her attorneys say it's highly unlikely that she will ever be released, and her case will remain under court supervision. Now, I also have read that she has been up for release several times over the past, I believe, decade now, and that every time a date comes where she's allowed to, propose release or petition release, she chooses not to. And that it's almost because of the guilt she feels, that she doesn't even want to try to get out. She wants to stay in treatment because of the burden she carries from this. And I've also read that she and her attorneys still have a friendship and a relationship in that regard, but they've never talked about that day. And that she refuses to talk about it because she is so emotionally scarred by it. Now, her ex-husband, Russell, who goes by Rusty, was recently in the headlines giving his take on Lindsay's case.
Andrea Yates, 22 years ago. Never forget this case. It was the first time that I had really seen the idea of postpartum depression and psychosis come to play in the criminal justice system. It led Yates to drown her 5 children, one by one after the other, in the bathtub. As remarkable as the legal theory was the human component, her then husband, Rusty, said he forgave her. The case brought national attention and support to hundreds of thousands of women who suffer in the hopes of, never allowing a tragedy like Yates to happen again. But of course it did. Just last week, a young Massachusetts mom who's also a midwife, her name is Lindsay Clancy. She allegedly strangled her 3 young kids to death. Clancy also suffered from extreme postpartum depression. Mothers do not kill their children. And that is a big part that feeds into the understanding even legally. Her husband, like Rusty, says he forgives her for killing their kids. How? It's so hard to understand, and that's why I wanted you to hear from somebody who lived it. Former husband of Andrea Yates, Russell Yates. It's good to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
First, how you doing?
Pretty good. Life goes on. I'm married again and not married anymore. We had a son. He's 14 now, and and such a joy. Very happy, very proud of him.
What did you think, Rusty, when you heard about this case?
Yeah, it sounds similar. I mean, anytime I hear of a case like this, I get a little sad because, you know, I had hoped that, you know, we'd have less and less, but realistically, I mean, it's a sickness. People get sick. You know, it happens. It's sad.
Well, that is a lot to digest given what you had to suffer through. What do you want people to understand about why you were able to forgive, and what people need to understand, not about your judgment, but about what we're talking about when we talk about postpartum depression and what it does to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a psychiatrist or psychologist could explain it, you know, but basically the way I understand it is it's much like having a dream or nightmare overlaid on reality, so that, you know, a person sees things that aren't real, hears voices that aren't real, believes things to be true that aren't true, and they act on that. I mean, it's every bit as part of their reality, you know, as anything else. So they can't distinguish, you know, between those thoughts and those images and those voices and anything else. So that's real, and then they act.
I remember you at the time.
Reality. So
I remember you at the time, and going back and reviewing the case, that you kept saying that Andrea loved her kids, that she did everything she could for her kids, and that there was never any way that anything would ever make you believe anything but that. So there had to be another explanation other than evil or other than malice or anything that goes into murdering, because Andrea wasn't capable of that. Have you always remained ironclad in your belief that that's the case?
100%. Yeah, I mean, Andrea was a wonderful mother. You know, I think when someone acts so out of character like that, it's kind of a flag, you know, that there's something else going on. And, you know, as far as forgiveness goes, I think that's kind of the start. Like you said, if something's completely out of character, this can't be right. What else is there, you know? And then I realized, okay, you know, at the time I did not know that she'd been psychotic. I did not know what psychosis even was or what the symptoms were. And, you know, like in this case, you know, you can do all you can at home, but you really can't protect yourself from a psychotic person at home. I mean, they get up in the middle of the night and, you know, light the house on fire or poison everyone or who knows, you know. It's so, you know, as far as the next step of forgiveness, I'd say, is understanding it's a sickness, you know, that but for, you know, that causation, right, but for her sickness, she would never, ever, ever, ever have harmed our children.
While Andrea Yates and Lindsay Clancy's cases seem similar on the surface, there are some major differences. Officers who responded to the home after Andrea called 911 testified that she appeared unemotional and soaking wet as she calmly told police, "I killed my kids." Her best friend testified that she was a sweet friend and loving mother, but that after the birth of her fourth son, Luke, she turned into, again, a total zombie who stared into space and could not finish sentences. And Andrea had a long history of mental illness. She twice attempted to take her own life. She had been diagnosed with recurrent postpartum depression and had been hospitalized several times for psychiatric care. Andrea was weaned off of Haldol, an antipsychotic medication, under the supervision of her doctor, just weeks before she killed her children. Her attorney, George Parnham, said that if she had not been taken off that medication, her children would still be alive. Medical experts for the prosecution and defense agreed that Andrea was mentally ill, but the prosecution argued that she knew the difference between right and wrong at the time of the drownings. They theorized that Andrea carried out an efficient and well-planned murder. She knew it was wrong, as evidenced by the fact that she kept her plan a secret, and she did not share the details of her psychosis until after the killings. Prosecutors also argued that Andrea decided to drown her children to escape the overwhelming stress of raising and homeschooling her children. Andrea's defense medical experts argued that Andrea believed deeply that killing her children was the right thing to do. Andrea believed that Satan had taken over her body and soul and was eyeing her children's souls next. Andrea told psychiatrists and other experts who evaluated her after her arrest that she believed that if she killed her children while they were still innocent, they would be sent to heaven and she would have defeated Satan. And that once Andrea turned herself in, if she was sentenced to death, in her mind, this would fulfill the biblical prophecy to defeat Satan as well. Interestingly, at Andrea's second trial, the jury foreperson had a message to send with their verdicts, writing, "Don't let this happen again. Do what you've got to do with legislation, with insurance companies. Don't let this happen again." Which, how chilling is that? Because once again, here we are. A family was destroyed and 3 precious lives were taken. I keep thinking about Patrick and can't imagine what he must be going through, and hearing the prosecutor describe when he found his children was incredibly upsetting, and the emotions he went through must have been horrifyingly surreal. So is there justice for Cora, Dawson, Callan, and Lindsay, or is it completely separate? And if so, what does justice look like in this situation? I recently read an article titled, "Is it a crime to charge Lindsay Clancy with a crime?" This was from the Boston Globe. Ultimately, that article's answer was no, because the DA, Timothy Cruz, wouldn't be doing his job. In the article, it mentions a quote from a former DA in Suffolk County where he said, "These 3 young children were horrifically murdered." For Tim Cruz to say, "Okay, it's reported in the news that the defendant is suffering from postpartum depression, so I'm not going to charge her with murder," that would be malpractice on his part. Another former DA of Middlesex County and State Attorney General said, "It's the duty of the prosecutor to represent the interests of justice and the state. This case needs to be tried in public, not behind closed doors or in the court of public opinion." The article also mentions that the district attorney over Lindsay's case, Tim Cruz, successfully prosecuted LaTarsha Sanders for killing her 2 sons with a kitchen knife in 2018. Now, I did a video on this case. You can see it. It's not many videos back. Her family said she was psychotic and delusional, but LaTarsha was convicted on first-degree murder charges and sentenced to life in prison. So I want to know what you guys think. What should we do with cases like these? Do we charge women with murder and have them prove their mental illness in court? What if it's a case of true psychosis without having a history, and maybe a woman doesn't have documented mental illness in the past that she can bring to court? Do we sentence them to life in prison or to a psychiatric facility? On the other hand, how do we prevent truly evil parents from claiming a defense like this when it's not the case at all? A la Chris Watts. And one more thing that I forgot to mention that I want to bring up that had everybody up in arms during the arraignment. It was strongly suggested by a lot of people in the public who believe this was premeditated that Lindsay was callous, that she showed no emotion during the arraignment, that she had a very stoic face, that she wasn't remorseful, that she wasn't tearful, and that she just, was wiped clean in the face. But I had to say, honestly, my opinion is I don't see that. I don't. I'm not saying she showed any emotion. I certainly didn't see any. But she was wearing a mask, so all you could see was right here on her eyes. She's paralyzed now. I'm guessing she is heavily, heavily medicated. She's probably also still in an extreme state of shock, I would imagine. So to be sitting like this, and I know this is going to be a really unflattering angle, guys, but to be sitting like this, paralyzed with a face mask covering your entire face during your arraignment, I don't know how you would see a lot of expression. So that argument doesn't really hold much weight with me. Some of the other ones do, I will be honest. Some of the other ones are definitely giving me pause, but that one, not so much. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this case. Do you still believe what you believed initially, whether you thought from the get-go that she's a cold-blooded, calculated murderer, or that she was innocent and suffering from postpartum psychosis and that she deserves psychiatric care? Or has your opinion shifted at all? Did the arraignment shift it one way or another? Let me know in the comments below, because I love reading your feedback and hearing your opinions, especially on tough cases where sometimes people lean in both directions. I just ask that we keep it respectful in the comments, guys, because there is a lot of division out there and a lot of different opinions. So let's keep it respectful, whatever your opinion is. I think we're going to learn a lot more. Actually, I know we are going to learn a lot more once this goes into the trial, the stages for trial, because then you have medical experts coming forward, you have any previous medical history that maybe has been protected up until now. We will have more statements. So much more information is going to come through the discovery piece of this as well. So I think it's hard to form a clear opinion at this point, at least for myself. I'm struggling a bit. I don't know what I believe. There's something pulling at me. I don't think this was premeditated. I really don't, because again, I just go back to, if this was premeditated, if she was just over being a mother, wanted to check out, didn't want the responsibility, why would she actively take the steps and, we know she sought out help. We know she posted in Facebook groups that she needed help. Her husband reached out for help on her behalf. If she just wanted to check out and was going to plan this whole thing, why would she try to get better? We've seen in other cases with murderers, they're not trying to go to Murderers Anonymous or something like that to not murder. So why would she try to take steps to better her mental health if her plan was that all along? It just doesn't tie for me. But if there's something I'm missing, let me know, because, I know a lot of people have some very strong opinions on this. I'm following this case very closely. I know it took me a minute to get this update out there. It's because I really wanted to gather all of the information, form an opinion, rewatch that arraignment several times, and come to you guys with a, well thought out collective point of view, and just kind of, again, being objective, because all of those details, in my opinion, really are subjective as to which way you could go and which way you could believe that, what you believe it could mean. So I'll keep you guys updated as I follow closely. As always, it's much faster for me to post updates on my Instagram, which is @_AnnieElise. I think I posted some, actually I did. I know I posted some Lindsay updates on there a couple weeks ago when I couldn't jump over here onto YouTube. So it's faster for me to sometimes to just jump on there and go on my story and give you the updates, but I always will come back here and give you the updates as well. So make sure you're following along there, but also take a quick second now to hit that subscribe button so that you'll get notified as I post videos on this channel regarding the case. All right, guys, thanks again for tuning in, and until the next one, stay safe.